Welcome to Sputnik, orbiting the world with me, George Bush. I've given up interfering in other people's countries and looking for non-existent WMDs and decided to try my hand at presenting Sputnik instead. Oh no you don't, George. I'm Neil Clarke. I am presenting Sputnik for George and Gayatri. Now, they've got an awful lot of coffee in Brazil, but they've also got an awful lot of political and economic turmoil too. Nearly a year after assuming his presidency, Michel Temer is overseeing the country's worst recession. People are taking to the streets, and the anti-corruption investigation, Operation Carwash, could see Temer himself impeached, just like his predecessor, Dilma Rousseff. Will the country wake up and smell the coffee? And can they recapture the optimism of just a few years ago? Joining us this week to help us find out is the analyst, Victor Fraga. Victor, a very warm welcome onto the Sputnik.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming on. So let's talk about Operation Carwash, this giant anti-corruption probe that's been going on now for how many years? 2 or 3 years? What's it all about, really?
It's been going on for about 3 years. Initially, it looked excellent. People thought this is a huge corruption scandal. You are unveiling a lot of wrongdoing and the oil giants. But then slowly people began to realize that the objective of Operation Carwash wasn't to destroy corruption, but to destroy a single political party, the Brazilian Workers' Party.
All right, okay.
Proof of that is not a single politician from the PSDB, the neoliberal party of Brazil, has ever been summoned to give a statement, let alone being prosecuted, while people from the Workers' Party have been consistently persecuted. Dilma was ousted not because of Operation Carwash, but due to an accounting technicality called fiscal peddling, so moving a budget from one area to the next. Something very common. Every single president in office since the dictatorship had done it. So Operation Carwash plus the coup d'etat, which we saw last year, were instruments in the fight against the Workers' Party, the demonization of the Workers' Party so that they could be removed from presidency, and that the PSDB, with the party in power right now, which is technically a center party, Michel Temer's party, but they have implemented a very aggressive neoliberal agenda. The Guardian labeled it the most extreme, the harshest neoliberal package in the world.
There's been lots of cuts in spending, hasn't there, been announced? And the pension age is being risen, isn't it?
Yeah, it should. To 49 years of work.
Wow.
Public spend in healthcare and in education has been frozen for 20 years. I can't think
20 years?
For 20 years. For 20 years.
Wow.
So they have amended the constitution to implement these extreme changes, these extremely violent changes. They would not be able to do that under the Workers' Party because it's a left-wing party which has implemented a lot of social programs, has lifted 40 million people out of poverty. So all of a sudden you had Operation Carwash, this coup d'etat with a thin veneer of an impeachment. The Brazilian constitution does allow for an impeachment, but it's for a high crime or a misdemeanor, not an accounting technicality. Even Michel Temer himself has recognized that Dilma has been ousted not because she's corrupt, but because she failed to embrace what he calls the bridge to the future. It's his extreme neoliberal program. I would call it bridge to the 19th century, bridge back to slavery. But he said himself, she's not corrupt. She has been ousted because she failed to embrace the bridge for the future. So So
we're really talking about a coup here, aren't we? Against a left-wing political party. Destroy a left-wing political party in Brazil. Why isn't there more outrage about this internationally?
Well,
by sort of pro-democracy forces in the West, we haven't heard too much about it, have we?
Yeah, the media, the international media, has been very quiet and reserved about it. They've mistakenly reported that Dilma was ousted on corruption charges, and that's extremely dangerous, because what we're seeing now, there are a lot of things surfacing. Aécio Neves, the defeated candidate, has been an audio has been leaked of him bribing someone from a company for 2 million reais, it's about £500,000, and threatening to kill the person if he did a plea bargaining, and reported him. That's in an audio. So and people are stopping to believe the political establishment, and there's this very dangerous rhetoric. Everyone in politics is corrupt. No, not everyone in politics is corrupt.
So, Victor, what's really behind this? Is it a case of the Brazilian financial elites, the rich classes in Brazil, the establishment, trying to sabotage the Workers' Party? Is that what's really the basis of this?
Well, it's that. So the old elites have lost a lot of their privileges. So I have literally heard people complaining, I used to have 3 maids, now they're going to university, I can't hire a maid anymore. I have literally heard people say that more than once in different contexts. So the old elites have seen some of their benefits slashed. Needless to say, Brazil still has huge social gaps. Brazil was the 13th economy when Lula took power in 2002. By the time Dilma was ousted, Brazil was the 6th world economy, ahead of the UK. 40 million people had been lifted out of poverty, and Brazil had paid off its external debt with the IMF in its entirety, and was beginning to set up a bank with the BRICS. Right. So the US are used to seeing the countries in their backyards not doing a lot of noise, and once they do a little bit of noise, let's get these noisy people out. Let's stage a coup. So the US have been deeply involved in everything that happened in Brazil. I'll give you just some pieces of evidence. The American ambassador Liliana Ayalda, during the coup, she was also the ambassador in Honduras and in Paraguay, precisely at the time of the coup. So she's a coup expert, there's no question about that. The Judge Sergio Moro, who heads the anti-workers party Carwash investigations, he has links to the CIA. It has been revealed through documents in WikiLeaks. The protests on the streets, the pseudo-student movements which asked for Dilma to be ousted, have been financed by lobbyists at the Koch Industries. And this is no secret. If you go to the Koch Industries, the oil refinery in Texas, you will see pictures of the leader of a movement they call MBL, Kim Kataguiri. So these are not student movements. These are movements financed by very reactionary organizations in the US. And most important of all, the day after the vote of the coup in the lower house of parliament in Congress in Brazil, one of the leading figures of the neoliberal party, Aloysio Nunes, traveled to the US to meet with Thomas Shannon, who is the most senior person in Latin American affairs under Obama, who reports directly to Obama. So what we're seeing really is a counter-hegemonic movement, the US getting involved, jeopardizing, destroying democracy in Brazil with a view to undermine not only the BRICS, but oil in Brazil. It has been said that the US spent trillions of dollars to claim the oil in Iraq. In Brazil, they only had to lobby a few MPs. So what's happening now? Literally overnight, the illegitimate coup-mongering government destroyed and privatized the oil production in Brazil. We haven't reached the oil yet. The oil is very deep down in the Atlantic Ocean. It's called pre-salt because there's a layer of salt at the bottom of the Atlantic, and you have to go beyond that. So it takes many years, and the oil has just been discovered. But this money, which was going to go to healthcare and education under Dilma, is now being sold to international organizations. The first company to grab the piece of the cake was a Norwegian company, but a lot more are going to follow. And the oil industry in Brazil is going to be largely privatized. It's a message they're trying to send out. Don't get metal worker such as Lula to run your country. We're gonna get there and get rid of him. Now they're trying to.
Well, let's talk about Lula, because
absolutely.
He's head of the polls, isn't he? He's the most popular candidate for the next presidential elections.
So what's happened now is there was the audio leak from Aécio Neves, him basically saying, "I want 2 million," and the plea bargaining guy will be shot. We should kill him if he doesn't follow our instructions, or something to that interest. Another senator was caught saying, Aécio Neves' best friend was caught saying just this week, "I don't do anything wrong. All I do is traffic drugs." So that's how bad it is in Brazil. You have hard proof evidence. You have a video of someone handing a suitcase of Aécio Neves' cousin, handing a suitcase full of money for the bride. How harder can the evidence get?
Absolutely.
A hologram. That's the only harder piece of evidence I can possibly conceive, and yet they're not taking any action against that. And against the Workers' Party, against Lula, they have been searching for a crime, searching for a reason to prosecute Lula.
Right.
And a very important phrase that a judge has coined in Brazil, who is also Dallagnol is his name. He's involved in the Carwash investigations. He said, "We have no proof against Lula, but we have conviction that he is guilty." So we're seeing lawfare. So Lula is not being prosecuted. He's being persecuted. You might be familiar with Jeffrey Robertson, who is the Australian-British human rights lawyer, who is Lula's lawyer. He says, the problem with Brazil is the justice system in Brazil is vestigial of the European system. So it's an old-fashioned European system, which no longer applies in Europe, where the same person collects the evidence, judges, and sentences you. So this judge, Sérgio Moro, he collects the proof at his convenience, at his leisure. He judges and he sentences Lula.
Judge, jury, and executioner all in one.
And there's plea bargaining, which was actually introduced by Dilma with the best of intentions. But plea bargaining has become equivalent to torture in the sense that the person being accused, you will say anything that they wish to hear in order to reduce the sentence. So Lula is guilty. Yeah, you want to hear Lula is guilty? I'll tell you Lula is guilty. And despite that, there's there's no evidence yet, and there will not be any evidence that Lula is involved in any corruption scandal. So on the other hand, what's happening in Brazil is so serious with the accusations against Aécio Neves. Because people no longer believe in the political establishment. And even the right-wing people who argued, we got rid of the Workers' Party because they're corrupt. And now that they see that the neoliberal party is far more corrupt, they're simply arguing everyone is the same, they're all corrupt. And such rhetoric is extremely dangerous because if you demoralize an entire political establishment, you could open the back door to a military coup d'etat, or to something far more dangerous. So there's a big question mark hanging above Brazil right now.
Well, thank you very much, Victor, for coming on the Sputnik and shedding some light on the current political situation in Brazil.
And we do need some light. With urgency.
Don't go away, because we'll be discussing political unrest in another BRICS country. Find out which one after the break. Welcome back to Sputnik with me, Neil Clarke, standing in for my good friends George and Gatry. Another BRICS country facing a neoliberal backlash is South Africa. Thousands have been marching against President Jacob Zuma, who's been hit by a series of corruption scandals. Activists of the governing ANC, however, have accused the opposition Democratic Alliance, who this week laid treason and corruption charges against Zuma, of being run by wealthy whites and big business CEOs. George Shire is an analyst and expert on the region. George, a very warm welcome on board the Sputnik. Thanks for coming on. You have been to South Africa, I think it was 5 or 6 times in the last few months, haven't you? And
yes,
what do you pick up from the streets about what's really going on there?
Oh, South Africa is in a moment of a crossroad. The moment, what I call the conjuncture. By conjuncture, I mean the moment in all processes cohere into a whole. Something is going on in South Africa. You can feel the pulse of people being angry on the street. Okay, and they are angry, and so what the practice, the articulation of that anger comes in the guise of, jobs, comes in question of students about curriculum, questions about student grants, questions about violence on the street, and so on. There's a level of disquiet in the country. What it hasn't kind of cohered into a coherent narrative in which people can buy into. So there is disquiet on one end, and a kind of a sort of dispersal of opinion all over the place. And what that does, it makes it difficult to see somebody displacing the ANC,
right?
In that sense.
Because what about the Democratic Alliance? I mean, would it be fair to call them? I mean, we've had I've just said about the ANC activists have said that this is basically a party financed by rich whites and business CEOs. They haven't got majority support. I mean, they are the main opposition party, aren't they? But there is also opposition within the ANC, criticism of Zuma within the ANC, isn't there?
Take the DA for a start. I mean, it may be all those things financed by are, but actually the problem with the DA is that they really have, over this, even now, are unable to offer South Africans a coherent alternative. Right. They simply are a kind of anti-Jacob Zuma or anti-somebody else, but they haven't got something that is coherent, that a post-apartheid South Africa or even the region can buy into. They cannot deliver.
So the main opposition to Zuma could become from the ANC itself, from the anti-Zuma faction.
If it were, it could do, but I would like to kind of with the qualifications. I think the challenge for the ANC is how it about how it can think a future without being in control. Right. Yeah. So it is no longer in control of events, or it is not in control in that way. It is still there, but it doesn't have a language of articulation that is, if you like, touches the popular as probably did before. And one can explain that in a number of ways. Part of it is to do with if you go back to Codesa, the moment in which there really is a sort of compromise between capital and anti-apartheid, liberation struggle and so on. This is really a compromise. And part of the problem with that compromise, it left the question of social injustice untouched. And what happens in that moment, the Truth and Reconciliation Committee comes in and turns everybody's focus towards individuals. It was the problem of the corrupt police officer or the corrupt judge or whatever it might be, not the system.
Not the system itself, yes.
So a lot of energy diverted people's attention to the economic, away from the economic. Now that is what is returned with a vengeance.
I read, George, that it's incredible, 20-odd years since the end of apartheid, that 90% of the wealth in South Africa is still owned by 10% of the people, and these are mainly white.
Yeah, well, because that's precisely that's what I'm getting at. That is what is left.
There hasn't really been the economic changes.
We might want to say something different. You might want to ask, if you go to the central tenets of the Freedom Charter, about question about land, about the economic, about all those issues to do with what I call social injustices, they are left untouched. It is a compromise in order to end apartheid, and that is to end racial rule in that way. Okay? Legal racial rule. Their habits have remained. Their habits in the everyday remain. The economic is still very much controlled in the same way. Okay.
Yes.
There are a few black folk here and there who've just and what I call the Cosby Show brigade. The kind of like what you have is a sort of black capitalism. Gupta's on one end, and Ramaphosa is no different. And Oppenheimer on another. Different faces of the same thing.
Yes.
Okay. And without facing this same thing, without asking what decolonizing that economic, South Africa is on a precipice, and that's the challenge for the ANC.
Right.
It can't, and it's not because Malema EFF is the answer. The issue is the EFF speaks to that condition.
Yes, I'm with you. Yeah.
It speaks to that question. So some of it is to do with the land. Unlike Zimbabwe, in South Africa, there is the cities too.
Right.
The people who build the cities, I sometimes call them the wretched of the earth, the land, they will be the ones who say, we want Johannesburg too. So you can't, even if you start redistributing the land, which is important, it will get to these other sites of occupancy. Okay, and the more people stall these processes of social injustice, the more violent, if you like, it's likely to be. And the difficulty for South Africa is to think with that background of anger that is tacit. You can touch it as you kind of moving around, whether it's on the sidewalk, whether it's in the bars, whether it's to do with the violence towards women, whether all these kinds of violence has become a kind of index of disquiet in South Africa.
So you're saying that the problems today really do stem from the compromises that were made 20 odd years ago.
That's right.
By not dealing with the economic reform.
That's right.
Not changing with economic ownership
That's
of
right.
industry
That's
and
right.
land.
That's right.
So is there a hope or chance that Zuma may actually start to tackle these things now with the ANC in order to boost its popularity? Now apartheid is gone 20 years ago, we can then move on to the economics.
I don't frame it that way, that whether Zuma can do it. That is not to excuse. Of course, it's part of the story. I don't frame it that way.
Okay.
I think it's a whole class of both the political class and the intellectual class.
Right.
There's a struggle of ideas about how to think a future in which people can live together. What does it mean? On one hand was the promise of building a non-racial society. And South Africa, in that sense, was in the front of building a non-racial world. Wonderful stuff. It hasn't been achieved, not quite. The business is not over yet, but it's a wonderful marker.
Yes.
The economic, what people didn't do was look at the way in which that touches the economic. And at the same time, think about what an economic is for. Is it the accountants making sure the books are in order? Or is it about serious economic liberation so that people can have fresh water? All the mantra about service delivery, which finance minister of another importance it might be sometimes, is a red herring unless one goes back to the central questions of social injustice left over from the compromise at CODESA. South Africa is in choppy waters.
So how do we see this panning out, George? How do you see the future for Zuma particularly and for the ANC? They are still on course, aren't they, to win next year's elections, according to polls?
I think they will win because there's no coherent alternative. Right, that's the reason they will win.
Yeah.
It won't win because they are, if you like, intellectually on the right path.
Right.
So there are squabbles in the house.
Yes.
But the squabbles in the house aren't going to disrupt them maintaining even a reduced majority. Of course, we can never tell how things are. One is not taking it for granted. I'm saying that in the absence of a coherent alternative, that challenges the ANC in a hegemonic sense, they will win. Now, what does that mean? The problem for the DA sort of thinks itself in clothes of the past. It harks from some golden moment. The interesting thing I noticed on the last time I was in Johannesburg in March, and I was sitting in this Uber car, being driven one place or another, and I'm talking to the taxi driver what he thought. And look at who's demonstrating. Can you imagine? Think of it. The people who are on the demonstration are these kind of white liberal kids, and they don't even know how to blow a vuvuzela. And then saying something about the kind of nature of protest. It's not saying black folk are not involved in it, but it is a descent of the well-off. It's not a descent of the have-nots.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
And what Zuma does is to capitalize on that. You see what I mean?
Yes,
so all he has to do is to go and evoke those images of yesterday, and it'll get him through. Right. So, and the other thing is, the only people who can remove Zuma is the ANC itself recalling him.
Right.
And they're not in the business of doing that at the moment.
Well, the Nelson Mandela Foundation, I was just reading this week, it's called for him to step down. So there is some, isn't there, within the ANC broader movement.
The Nelson Mandela is not the ANC. It's not an.
Yeah.
It's an illusion to think the Nelson Mandela Foundation or any foundation for that matter. Everybody has foundations in South Africa. You might just ask yourself who pays the ferryman. How do these foundations? They're important. They do some function, but they are not in themselves. They do not have. They can occupy the news media daily. They are the celebrities of a liberal moment, but they are not the ones who deliver the vote. You know, the votes, they're not the ones who deliver the votes. They're not the ones who influence the popular imaginary. Okay? So in a way, that's the difficulty the NC has. Okay? It's having a difficulty about how to think the future in the life of how they've lived. Okay? They don't know how to break from that past.
Yes.
It's to do with the way in which neoliberalism is kind of returning with a vengeance. I talk of neoliberalism as the revenge to independence movement. You've become independent. We're going to come back and get you.
Yes.
Okay?
Well, thank you so much, George, for coming on the Sputnik and enlightening us about the current situation in South Africa.
Thank you for having me. It's been my pleasure.
Well, unfortunately, that's all we've got time for on the Sputnik this week. I've been Neil Clarke, standing in for George and Gatry. And as George would say, it's been marvellous.